the great executive producer, the big honcho at NFL Films, and joining us on the River Islands guest line for the first of many throughout the 2026 season is Greg Cosell. And we are so excited to get this going again. And the question is, Greg, do you know or have you ever had sort of an intimidating effect on people before that you're aware of?
I sure hope not.
Yeah, I mean I can't. my partner over here, I mean, it's he's been hot under the collar all day getting ready for this.
Well, not a lot's really happened yet, so it's now we're in the speculative stage, gentlemen, where everybody has an opinion about things that haven't happened yet.
Which is why the nerves really start to come in because, I mean, what do you think De'Zhaun Stribling's going to look like? Well, guys, I can't tell you that because it actually hasn't happened yet. And when it does, I'll look at the tape.
He's obviously going to be Jerry Rice. We all know that.
Hello.
Go ahead and cut that.
Hello. Yes, it is. It's speculation season, Greg. I'm surprised you even went to your office this time of year.
Oh God! I don't think I've been out of my office. I've probably watched. Let's see. Since the end of the draft, I've probably watched about 110 guys who will be in next year's draft. Okay. They won't all be, but probably 90 of them will be. So I've seen a ton of guys getting a foundation for those guys. A couple of weeks ago, I started going back to the NFL. So I started watching tape the way I can't do during the season, where I can watch 5 or 6 games of a team in a row. I can watch quarterbacks and just focus, find focus on quarterbacks. I can look at some defenses in great detail. These are things I can't quite approach it that way during the season when I just have to try to get as many games watched every week as possible.
I do bet, and sure, this is speculative, but at the same time, a lot about both players. And so I wonder what you think the marriage of Brock Purdy and Mike Evans is going to look like.
Well, it's funny because I did a deeper dive into Purdy this offseason, which I pretty much do every offseason with certain quarterbacks. Purdy's one of them. I think it's not so much, the connection. They'll get to that. I think it'll be the deployment because don't forget, Mike Evans, assuming health, he's a true what we call boundary X, where he's the single receiver to the short side of the field, the boundary side of the field. The 49ers have not had that kind of receiver in recent years. And number one, that can change what your receiver distribution looks like. In other words, you can line up in more 3-by-1 sets because now you have a true boundary X, that single receiver. And it also changes the way defenses have to react to that. So that's one thing that I think is important for the fact that Mike Evans is there. He can win one-on-one, and that's a big deal in this league because, it's a matchup league in some ways. Obviously, there's a lot of variables with a pass game, but it's a matchup league, and you need receivers who can win one-on-one.
And if you don't have that, as the Niners really haven't, in your words, in the past, does that change not only your concepts, but your formations as well?
It can, sure. There's no question. Look, obviously we know that Kyle Shanahan is one of the best in the league when it comes to use of formations, shifts, motions, so many elements that go into offense, but he's one of the absolute best in the league. But sometimes you'd like to be in a situation where you can, just line up and call a play for a player, knowing that you like the matchup let's say in a critical situation, and that it doesn't always have to be a masterful play call. Because, at the end of the day, the 49er offense is built on the play caller. This is not a situation where the quarterback is asked to do a lot before the snap of the ball. Brock Purdy is not calling protections. He's not changing protections unless he truly sees something that is absolutely problematic. The Kyle Shanahan approach it's the play caller's offense. So now Evans gives you a guy where, hey, in a critical situation, you like a matchup against a certain opponent and you feel like, we can call a play for Mike Evans.
Greg Cosell, NFL Films, his debut performance for at least football season 2026 with us here on Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game. Keeping it with the receiver room, I know none of us know exactly how they're going to deploy him, but based on what Deebo used to do with the Niners, and then based on what you saw him do in Washington last year, what kinds of things do you think are available to Deebo in this Niner offense?
Well, all we can assume is that he's still relatively Deebo. I mean, we're not going to sit here and decide what percentage of Deebo he is. Let's assume he's Deebo. We know how he was deployed in the past, and we know with McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel that it gives Shanahan so many options in terms of formation variation, in terms of shifts, in terms of motions, in terms of really dictating how a defense has to react and play. So it just gives them so many more options in terms of what they can do offensively, before the ball's even snapped. And it just makes it harder for a defense, because very often if a defense is uncertain as to motions and shifts, a defense can go to what we call their default defense, which is whatever it may be for the opponent. And offenses know that. Kyle Shanahan will know that, and then he can attack it. So now you have, players like Deebo and McCaffrey that are they can line up anywhere within your formation.
With Ricky Pearsall missing the year, now that he's going to have PCL surgery, going to be out for 9 months, which of their current receivers, or perhaps Stribling, has the skill set to be the best one to replace him?
Stribling skill set wise for sure, but he's a rookie, so again, it's a difficult offense to master. So I'm not out there; I don't know what's going on. But Stribling is very, very gifted, and he can be used in multiple ways. Christian Kirk is there. Christian Kirk's played a lot in this league. He's a player that's been able to be a slot guy. He's lined up on the outside. He's been a movement guy, which is very important in this offense. So there's a lot of options here. The guy that's always been a curiosity for me, because I watched him in college for a number of years, is Jacob Cowing. And, he's going into his third season. When he was at UTEP before he went to, I believe, Arizona, he was a deep threat. He was an explosive vertical dimension. He can run. So, again, I think this is probably all up for grabs now to some degree, given that, Ricky Pearsall's done for the year.
Greg, I got another Stribling question for you, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but you're so good on grinding the college tape, and yeah. I don't understand why this went the way it did. This feels like a weird process to me, where the Niners draft Stribling early in the second round. The whole world goes mock draft crazy because Stribling wasn't necessarily supposed to go there. But the only thing we've heard since the pick is the actual football people going, this dude's incredible. And I'm like, why wasn't there more pre-draft hype on Stribling then? If that's what everybody thought.
Those are hard questions for me to answer.
Don't you find that weird?
I do. But, people get caught up in this consensus BS, and it's total garbage. Look, there are guys who are quote unquote draft gurus. I guess I would fall into that category because, I grind away. There's only a few guys that really do it the right way. And I can tell you that because I know these guys. And, we're not going to sit here and mention names. I would never do that. That's not what I do. But there's only a few guys that really do it the right way. So, I can't tell you why Stribling wasn't thought of higher. I watched his tape. I watched his tape from last year at Ole Miss. I went back a year prior to Oklahoma State, and I really, really liked him a lot. You guys know that. I mean, we talked about it when they drafted him. And I obviously had no idea who was going to draft him when I evaluated him. Everybody has heard, which I'm sure went pretty viral, certainly in the Bay Area, when Kyle Shanahan spoke about the whole process of why they drafted Stribling where they did. And it made perfect sense when you think about it. So you're dealing with a guy that's 6'2", 210, can run under 4.4, and is a good route runner and worked the middle of the field an awful lot when he was at Oklahoma State. Wasn't asked to do a lot of that at Ole Miss, which is why I went back a year to Oklahoma State. So, to me, he was a really good prospect. That's why I don't do lists, guys, because, you can't, to me, you can't compare Stribling to Mekhi Lemon. They're two totally different kinds of receivers, and obviously everybody had Lemon, quote unquote, rated higher, but they're two totally different kinds of receivers that will likely be deployed in totally different ways.
And now defensively, the 49ers have a different coordinator than what they've had in the past. Raheem Morris gets the job. What are the hallmarks or the keys in a Raheem Morris scheme traditionally that is different than what the Niners have done?
Well, I think there'll be more multiple in what they do. Robert Saleh, who has been very good, obviously, in this league as a coordinator, he has a pretty defined approach in the way he plays. Last year, it didn't play out exactly the way he wanted to because his approach is based on the front four. And when you lose Nick Bosa and you don't have a pass rush and you lost Mikael Williams as well, then it all changes. And you saw that he had to change last year, but that's not his comfort level. He has a defined way to play. So what you'll see this year is a lot more variation. Raheem Morris, in his career as both a head coach and a coordinator, he's also been on the offensive side of the ball, as you guys know. He's been exposed to a lot of different schemes. And I think that you'll see more man coverage. I think you'll see more pressure. You'll just see more things. I mean, I think back to Atlanta a year ago, and even though he wasn't the coordinator, he still has to sign off on how they play. And they were a very aggressive pressure defense, a very aggressive man-to-man defense. I don't know how training camp is going, but one guy I'm particularly anxious to see, and by the way, when you're a fourth-round pick, you're not even guaranteed to make the team, but I'm really curious about this Asifians Price-Sock because he's 6'4", he's long, and he can play man. And I'm curious to see how all this shakes out, in connection with how Raheem Morris is going to, put together the defense.
Yeah, when we talk about that side of the ball and the defensive backfield, there's another guy I want to ask you about. The lasting image for 49er fans last year was Kyle Shanahan yelling at this guy on the sideline, and I think people thought he was in the doghouse and going to get traded. And now we're starting to hear a little bit of a low camp buzz that Renardo Green is doing really well. What's your assessment overall of him at this point in his career?
Well, Renardo Green's strength is press man. And obviously under Robert Saleh, they didn't do a lot of press man. But I remember watching him for 2 years at Florida State. And under that coaching staff, they played a high percentage of press man. And I thought he was a really good prospect if you were going to play press man. Now, when I say that, I hope people understand I don't mean every single snap. Nobody does everything every single snap. But he is, at his best, a press man corner. And I think if this team's going to play more of that, which my guess is they will, then I think Renardo Green fits that profile so much better. He's feisty, he's competitive, he's tough. He's just a better press man corner than he is an off-coverage zone corner.
When you look at this team up front, some of the new additions, Odigizua and Romello Height, who came out of college, what have you made of their tapes at their various levels and how they might fit with the Raheem Morris scheme?
Well, Odigizua, his best trade is rushing the quarterback, and that's why they made the trade, because they really did not have an inside pass rusher. The two rookies from a year ago, Collins and West, are not pass rushers. I think they hope Collins can become somewhat of one as he develops. He was a second-round pick, but they're not truly inside pass rushers. Odigizua is a very good inside pass rusher. And then they drafted Grayson Halton in the 4th round from Oklahoma, and he's an athlete. So, they're hoping that, he, like I said, 4th round pick, you never know. But, if he does well in camp, even if he plays 15 snaps a game and can play in certain pass rush situations, because he's an explosive mover and he's a gap penetrator. So, obviously they knew they needed pass rush, which is why they made the trade for Odigizua. Bosa's back. It's why they drafted Halton. We'll see how it all plays out.
Greg Cosell, NFL Films, Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game. Okay, Greg, Myles, Garrett, and Aaron Donald. What are the Niners?
Well, Donald hasn't. He's not back yet officially, right?
He's gonna be. He worked out officially today, but I mean, I'm reading.
Did he really?
Yeah. So I'm reading tea leaves. I think he's going to come back. What are the Niners going to do with that?
what is anybody going to do with that?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So what is anybody going to do with that?
I mean, what do you say about that? I mean, they were a really good D-line a year ago, and they didn't have either guy. And now they have, because Jared Verse is a very good player. Obviously, no one's Myles Garrett. I mean, I've heard Jim Schwartz, who's not coaching this year. He's been in the league, I think, 33 years. And he said in his 33 years, there's two players who are just different than anybody else, Myles Garrett and Calvin Johnson, players that he both coached. So, I mean, I don't know what you say. That's a crazy D-line. I mean, they got Garrett, they got Brian Fisk, they got Kobe Turner, who's a really good player that probably not a lot of people other than being, in the West Coast and in the NFC West know about nationally. But, yeah, it's a tough deal for whoever plays them. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. It's not going to be a lot of fun. And you know what? They score a lot of points too.
Yep.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about that side of the ball for the Rams because that's the Niners' first opponent, obviously down in Australia. Outside of
Down under.
Yeah, down. Thank you. It's a great breakdown right there geographically from Greg Cosell. What else about their offense would give the 49ers and other defenses reason to pause?
I would say their multiple use of personnel and formations and shifts and motions. It's a very difficult defense to play against. Last year they played, by the time the season ended, they played more than 30% of their snaps out of 13 personnel. And the way they lined up in that, you had no idea. So now as a defense, you have to decide how you want to play, how you want to match up to that. And of course, they don't have to play out of 13 personnel. They still have Devontae Adams. They still have Puka Nacua. So it's just a really difficult offense to play against from a tactical perspective, putting aside the talent level. And you're dealing with Matthew Stafford, who, every quarterback and hardly any would love to be in a situation where your mental acumen and your physical traits remain when you're 38 years old. I mean, this guy is incredibly intelligent and his physical traits have not deteriorated at all. I mean, how many quarterbacks have been like that basically in the history of the league? So, it's a hard offense. It's one of those things. What are you going to say?
Greg, let's how about this? Let's go back to the 49ers offensive side of the ball and talk about that instead, since the Rams are going to depress us. It's a bummer. Both of them right now have some camp injuries that are slowing this process, but I'm very curious who's going to win this gig behind Christian McCaffrey. What do you see as the possibilities for Jordan James and Kalen Black with their characteristics and how they might fit with a Kyle Shanahan scheme?
Well, just in terms of pure traits, I like Kalen Black more, and I really liked his tape. In fact, when the Niners drafted him in the third round, I thought that was a perfect fit because he is a tough, hard-nosed, physical runner. He's a drive sustainer. He's a take-no-prisoners guy. He ran over people in college. He's just one of those tough guys. And I think that fits how they run the ball, particularly inside. So, I mean, I like his traits better than Jordan James. I don't know how that'll play out. But, Kalen Black, don't forget he started at James Madison, then he went to Indiana. He's someone who I really liked coming out. I thought actually after the two Notre Dame guys and the kid from Arkansas, Mike Washington, was fascinating because of the size, speed. But after that, I thought Kalen Black was the best running back prospect in the draft.
When you look at the Niners offensive line, mostly intact from last year, I think 4 of the 5 returning starters. How did they look to you last year, and what do you make? We had Dominic Pooney coming up on the show a little bit later today. What's your Dominic Pooney scouting breakdown? Maybe we'll play it for him, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a whole, they probably have to play a little better than they did a year ago. I mean, look, we saw what happened last year. The run game, with McCaffrey, was just not the same as it was in terms of creating space for him. I think it just has to be better overall in terms of, of how they play this year. So I guess we'll see how it goes. It's an offensive line. They've expanded the run game over the last number of years because they've had to. You can't just run one kind of run. But I think that, in terms of trying to run the ball inside, that's one area where I truly think that they're going to have to be better running the ball inside than they were a year ago in terms of the offensive line.
We know you don't do lists very often, but where did this conversation rank in terms of your favorite ever appearances on Willard and Dibs?
Well, obviously the best one ever, guys, right? I mean,
Thank you.
Yeah, we know that.
Recency bias.
Until next week, at least. Until next week.
Exactly. But, I think, just getting back to Pooney for a second, his first season was really, really good. Don't forget, he played every snap, I think. He's played every snap, I think, for 2 years, right?
That's
I don't
correct.
think he's missed
That's accurate.
a snap. Yeah, I mean, and, he's one of those guys that is the way we would probably talk about him, if you think the way O-line people would talk about him, he's got linear explosiveness and play strength. He can match up physically. I mean, when he's at his best, he's got power. He can create movement in the run game. He can displace people in the run game. He can hold his ground in pass protection. Sometimes he gets his base too wide. As you asked me about that, I was just thinking back in my mind's eye because it's been a while since I've seen him. So I'm just trying to think back to, watching the tape every week. Sometimes he can get too wide in pass protection, and that can cause some problems, particularly against, guys who are powerful inside, because if your base is too wide and everything, in other words, if your feet are wider than your shoulders, you just don't have a whole lot, you don't have a firm base. I think that it's all there for him to be a really good player, but he was not as good overall in his second year as he was his first year.